Welcome, everyone, to DEI After 5, the show that focuses on topics across diversity, equity, and inclusion with some of the brightest minds in the industry. Here's your hostess, inclusive culture curator, and coach, Sacha Thompson.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to DEI After 5. I am so excited to have you here with us today. So anyone that has followed me or my journey in this work knows that I really love talking about all aspects of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so today's topic really is talking about the Indigenous populations and how we are looking or working with them in DEI. And this is something that has been very important to me because even in graduate school, that was one of the areas that I noticed there wasn't a lot of work being done in those spaces and how to uplift or acknowledge even some of the Indigenous or Native American tribes that were in our locations, or even students that were working with us at that time. And so today I am really excited to have with me Sunny Myers, who is a DEI practitioner, who is a technologist, who is just all of the things. Want to really enjoy having her here today. So Sunny, welcome.
Hey, Sacha, thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. So Sunny, tell people a little bit about yourself if they do not know, about you.
Yeah, so my pronouns are she, her. I always like to start with that. I am a mama bear to 5 awesome kiddos. We have a bonus kiddo right now with us. I have an awesome partner named Isaac, who really holds my world together. I am a community builder, a rugby coach. I really am a justice warrior. And that kind of has led me to in electrical engineering turned DEI practitioner. And I'm also identify as an Indigenous Native American woman of color. My tribal communities are Saponi and Lumbee, based out of North Carolina. And I'm also half white. So I have multiple identities in this space, and just really appreciate you having me here today.
Thank you. And so I kind of started off at the top talking about how Indigenous populations are often spoken about high level, but aren't really a part of the conversation. And so wanted to just hear from you a little bit about, your work in this space and how you've been able to kind of bring your identity along with you to help others learn.
Yeah, I think a lot of the time we hear a lot about, Latinx, and we hear a lot about, Black folks, but really the Indigenous feels, Native Americans specifically feel like a very much invincible community. I've seen many reports where it's, less than 1%. And so they don't even account them in the progress or the efforts that they're making on a number of different, programs or for feedback or, collective, community reach outs. And so I think that's really, really hard. And I know that my peers who also identify as Native American really struggle with that as well. And so we really just come together to amplify our voices, to lift each other up across the communities and the various tribes, specifically around in tech and in STEM. There's a huge gap there, and while we're making some strides in some of those communities, we're not really seeing a huge stride in the Native American, and that's mostly because the lack of effort and funding and programs around it. Right, the payback and the ROI isn't as lovely, right? It's not as compelling as a story when the numbers are 1s or 2s, but that 1 and 2 will literally change a tribal community. And I've seen it directly, actually just recently, really change the world for some of these communities. And the impact is just as significant.
Both of us kind of have worked in the tech space for a while. And even before I got into tech, I worked in graduate management education. So getting students interested in business school. And so doing that, I did strategic alliances. And one of the organizations that I worked with was the American Indian College Fund. And so from there, I started learning about ACES and other organizations specifically focused on American Indians, and getting access to those organizations. And so one of the things you talked about just now was the lack of intentional outreach. That's not, I can't say it's not happening, right? It's not happening at all. What are some things that organizations can do to be more intentional in this space? Because to your point, that one or two may not seem significant, but it's really huge.
Yeah, so I told, it's not like, stop assuming that every Native American person grew up on the reservation or lives on the reservation, and really lives in that community life. There are a number of those who do, right? But there are Native Americans walking amongst you like every day, and you might not even realize some of the biggest communities are actually not federally recognized and are more state, or locally recognized. And so start thinking outside of the box about how you're connecting with these communities. Reach out to tribal governments and see how you can get involved. Reach out to smaller programs who are doing the work. ACES is a wonderful conference to attend. So is SOCNUS, and really combining Hispanic and Latinos with Native Americans, right, to a combined space who share a lot of identities, right, and common experiences. And so, Reboot Representation's an amazing one for really forward looking. Natives in Tech is another small organization that's really looking to build and looking to grow in this space. And we really have a really strong network within our own communities, and really lean on to each other to help each other out. But, how do we expand that as allies? How do you expand that as allies in this space? I look at our Black and Brown, brothers and sisters in this space and say, can you come alongside of us, right, to really lift our voices? Because we don't have, I think people talk to me all the day, are like, are you going to start a ENG, in my existing company? I'm like, that means there's like a lot of work for very few of us. And it really is. We don't have the numbers to help carry that weight. And so the work is multiplied in those spaces. And so I've seen directly impact the, reaching out to one college student and then getting an internship and now getting a full-time position. And it's literally the first person in tech in their entire reservation. And how life-changing, and how now people, young ones in her community can see her now, is so impactful. And I think just asking how, but not expectations that you're going to hire 10 native, right. I think we have to kind of reposition those expectations, and it not just be around, Native American Heritage Month, right? It really needs to be a long-term investment in the communities, because as you mentioned earlier, accessibility, right? We see this already in Black and Brown communities, and then it's amplified, right, in more isolated communities where they don't have access to even decent Wi-Fi, like not even to make a connection in. Yeah. And so accessibility is a huge barrier as well.
Yeah, I think there's so many, especially in tech, there's so many opportunities to make connections and to learn and to teach. One of the areas that I learned about in grad school was even tribal colleges, right? Mm-hmm. There's so much talk about reaching out to HBCUs, which I think is so important, but there are tribal colleges out there, and many of them have programs, STEM programs, that can be enhanced by partnerships, that can be enhanced by really trying to make some of those connections. One of the companies that I worked for, the ERG for Native Americans, started partnering with organizations and even with some of the reservations to help use that technology to help preserve language.
Yeah.
Right. And in doing that, teaching some younger students how to code, it was just such a natural progression that it was benefiting the community, but also in preserving language, but then also teaching younger generations, like, this is very possible for you. And I think it's those opportunities that organizations don't necessarily think about. It's okay, how can I donate money? But it's not always about money.
No.
I mean, money is nice, but it's always, there are other opportunities to connect with, like, time and talent as well too.
Yeah, because they don't get to see that, right? They don't get to look up. Until my most recent position, I had never worked for a Native American person. And now I work for a Native American woman of color, and it's literally like a dream of mine to be able to say that. But when I was doing engineering, right, I never could look up and see myself. And like all of my identities. Yes, I could look up and see women, even though they were far and few in between, I could. But to see somebody who was a Native American, woman of color, and just say that I could do this. And I think that's where my passion grew. I also love, Sacha, where you just talked about tribal community or, tribal colleges. And I see your AKA in the back. There's a lot of Native American sororities and fraternities, and they exist in colleges that are not, in universities that are not tribal colleges.
Yeah.
Do a search, start there. That's a huge, it's a huge community that they already have built. I know in my backyard at UNC, they have a huge Native American sorority, and it's one of the biggest in the United States. And I think, like, looking outside of, like, there are pockets, we don't like to really leave our homeland. Like, we really don't. And while I've moved, a couple hours outside, it's a day trip for me to go back home and see what we call see your peoples.
Yeah.
And I think, like, when you look around the area, I specifically live in the Raleigh-Durham area, and there are tons of natives in our area who've kind of left, our tribal lands, but also, like, we're still well connected in, right? And so ask them, what's an opportunity that I can do something at your tribal community center, right? Or can you help me with somebody who, like, I think we are so willing to give you information and be a part of the growth and give back to our community that you would be pleasantly surprised of, how far you could really go with that.
And I think you touched on something that so many people may not even realize, right? Like, there's this mindset, for lack of a better term, that there are only Native tribes in the Midwest.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it's all just kind of out that way. But you're talking about North Carolina. I grew up in Virginia, right? Yeah. That's full of, tribes. I live in Maryland now, and there's, here. And it's such a big conversation if you are in the right places to listen in on some of those conversations, right? And what's important to the preservation of those tribes, but then also how you can create community and, as we were saying, access and connection and wanting to learn and grow, right?
Exactly. Yeah. There's powwows everywhere. Like, Google it, right? Search for it and go to a powwow. Invest in the culture. Spend money at, buying some fry bread and some Native American, arts, or, and handmade goods. Like my earrings, right? Like, really, really investing in and be like, there is some, I feel like, mystery but also this draw into our culture, and it is beautiful. And, and I feel like that is what, is one of our, is one of our power sets, is we have that draw. But it also, like, keeps people away because they don't feel like they're allowed to, or they're able to kind of enter that. And, yes, there are boundaries, right? And there are right ways, and there's cultural appropriation. So we really need to be mindful of that. But there are some ways that, like, I think it's, like, so proud is when people honor my culture, right? And who I am as a person and who my ancestors are and who our elders are. Like, it is so important that they recognize that. And it's like a quick way to earn trust with me. I would say one of the not quick ways to earn trust is like, did you know my grandma was like 5% Cherokee? It's always Cherokee. I swear it's always Cherokee.
Oh, sure.
Always Cherokee. My grandma was, and I'm like, how am I supposed to respond to that? And I know they mean well, good intentions, right? I'm assuming good intentions, but it's also like, oh, that's great. And I'm like, are you feeling your Native American? Like, I don't get it, but like, it's there. With that being said, there's all different ways to really, surround yourself and learn about the different tribes. And I don't speak for every Native American, nor do I speak for every tribe. And they're all vastly different of what celebrations, right, and their history and their story. And I think that's one of the beautiful parts about our culture is that it's so intertwined, but yet it's so siloed in some ways, in good ways. So,
you said something about celebration, and it triggered for me, and the phrase just went out of my head. Land acknowledgements. And so I was having a conversation with someone the other day about how some Native Americans feel that is shallow, right? In my history, and I'm still kind of working through some of this, I know it's something a lot of Canadian organizations do. And I'm starting to see a little bit more of that in the United States. But talk to me about what are land acknowledgements, because some folks may not even understand or know what those are. And then how can we take them from being shallow to meaningful?
Yeah. Thanks for bringing that up, actually. I love this conversation. So a land acknowledgement is a proclamation for the native land that you stand on and the indigenous land you stand on, depending on where you're at. They're a way to, you see them a lot of like ceremonials or like before speeches, or some examples. And you do see them a little bit more. However, I feel like I can count on like one hand how many times I've actually seen them in something that I attended, like a random thing where I wasn't the one who was like, should we do a land acknowledgement? Can we do a land acknowledgement here? And caveat, outside of Native American Heritage Month, like I always feel like you see them there. And so it is a beautiful way to educate about the native land that you reside on, or that you might be speaking at, or that like maybe your headquarters are based at. And to really bring education, about the original takers and keepers of this land, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think there's something beautiful and symbolic about that. And to just be seen, right, is to be valued and to be appreciated. And that is something powerful. So to say, maybe they're performative, yes. But what are you going to do with that education? How are you going? What is the call to action that goes along for that? So if you're a university and you have a land acknowledgement and you're doing that before your graduation ceremony, what else have you done, right? What are you doing to support, grow, develop, nurture, increase your representation of Native American folks in your university? What are you doing to do the same to your staff who might be, Indigenous or Native American? And so I think it's a combination is they can be really good, and there needs to be some sort of call to action or, action behind them for them not to be performative.
Yeah, I think that's the piece that I've noticed has been missing, right? It's like, okay, we're going to acknowledge we're on this land, and then we move on. Right. So it's like, okay, now that we know, what does that mean? What does that look like? And how do you honor that? Right. Because I think that's the piece where people struggle a little bit. It's difficult to acknowledge that land was stolen, right, from a community. And then so how do you kind of deal with that? And so it's something I've been grappling with quite a bit, because my undergraduate university has been doing a lot in the space, particularly around the enslaved, right? So the Black community. But then they started doing more land acknowledgments and doing more research and history on, okay, so what role did we play in some of the colonization, for lack of a better term,
Yeah,
of
exactly what it is. We're gonna call it like it is.
it is what it is, right?
Yeah.
Because there was a tribal college, a tribal school on that campus,
Yeah.
right? And so what did that look like? And so that's why it's been kind of top of mind for me, because it's an institution that I'm very well connected to, but I also understand, it's the second oldest college in the country, right? So they have a deep history in this work.
Mm-hmm.
We're Jamestown, Williamsburg, Virginia. So there's a lot.
There's a lot there.
There's a lot to unpack in that area. So I think that's why it's kind of top of mind for me. Yes, it's one thing to acknowledge, but it's also another thing to, what does reparations look like in this space? And, how does that play out on a larger setting, in a modern day setting? So that's kind of where my mind has been going with land acknowledgments and seeing kind of what's that next iteration of that.
Yeah. I think unpacking history is hard and it's challenging. It comes with straight harm, right? That was done. And I don't think like anybody wants to feel like they should have to pay for that. They're responsible of things that our ancestors have done, right? But we can't know where we're going if we don't know where we came from. And I feel like to really reach our full potential, to really reach, like you said, institutions like growth, right? And really, really be well and do it well, they got to unpack that history. And that doesn't mean it's going to be an easy road to walk, and it's not going to have a lot of emotional ties to it. But I think going back to the partnerships, like I guarantee you there are local Native communities that they can lean into that says, could we pay you for your time, right? To help us do this the right way. It's a good and bad example looking into the residence schools in Canada, right? And finding, the remains of, I get super emotional, thinking about this, and I'm sorry, but
that's okay. Because it's part of the pain, right? That's part of that history. Yeah.
Thinking about, what happened to these children, like legitimately just innocent children, and the colonization that happened. If we can't unpack the history and the true what really happened, then we cannot move forward. There cannot be reconciliation. Cannot be like talks of reparations, right? We cannot get to those until we can at least understand like what happened on the grounds that we stand on, right? Where was the harm done? And where can we also like build bridges, right, to move forward? I think like we, again, I'm not going to speak for every tribal community or any tribal community, but like I feel sometimes swept under the rug. I feel like, a very much of like, it's yes, we see you. We love that you're Native American. We love being like, that identity, and we think it's really cool. And there's this mystery behind it. But like really what comes of like what happened to my people and how we got here. And, even the stories of my grandparents, right? And my great grandparents, and hearing, their stories and the genocides, right? And the racial, the racism that happened to them. And we can unpack a lot here, but even the racism between, let's get real, Native Americans and Blacks, and why that was happening. And it really was because white folks was creating this, we could go
the divide.
It still happens to this day. Like people are like, why are Native Americans so racist to Blacks in this community, and vice versa? And I'm like, because
by design.
It's because that's what we were taught. Because if we were Black, we were going to get treated horribly. And if you were Native American, you're about it. We were maybe treated a little bit better in some areas. And so it's like, oh, we can't be Black because people didn't know. And so there's just a lot to unpack of the injustices done on so many underrepresented folks in this area. But I really think that we have to start looking at where did it all begin and how did it all begin before we can move forward. Like, and I guarantee you I know people way smarter than myself in this space, historians who are literally could like recite everything, and start leaning on them. Go to your local history museum, right? Your library. I mean, these people are geniuses, right? And well-versed into this. We have museum curators, right? Call the Smithsonian, the Native American, museum, and start there. There are so many resources that people are like, yes, you want to do the work? We're coming alongside you and we'll help you do the work. I mean, I've not heard one person say, nah, like I'm too busy for that. They're like, yes, we need more of that.
Yeah. You said that, and see, now I'm about to get emotional. Last summer, we took our bonus boys to the Native American Museum in DC, the Smithsonian. And that's probably the only museum that I've ever gone to where I left angry. I left so angry and frustrated and lied to, if that makes sense. In that, what was beautiful about it was it does a timeline of history, kind of what you're taught in school, but then it gave another timeline of like, this is what was really happening. These are the conversations that were happening. This is why these folks showed up at this meeting and what changed. I mean, it was so eye-opening in so many ways, but it also made me realize that the racism that we talk about in corporate spaces, like you're saying, like the history of that and how it manifests today. And then it's not just Black and white, right? Like there's very intentional things that are happening. Even the model minority with Asian Americans, that's all very intentional. And so when we talk about race and we talk about that in DEI, we have to be very conscious, like anti-Blackness is a very real thing that all of this is tied to, but it's not just, again, the Black and white. It's how does anti-Blackness show up, the white supremacy of anti-Blackness show up with Native Americans, with Asians, with the Latino community, right? Those are the conversations that we need to start to unpack so that we can realize, as you said, where do we build bridges and how do we start moving forward in this space?
And how do we support each other? Right? Like your struggles might not be my struggles, but they're probably not much far apart, right? Let's be honest. And while, I'm not going to speak for you or I won't speak for you, but I guarantee we could have a conversation after this and be like, I just struggled with this week. You'd be like, oh, me too. Right. And, it's unfortunately so common, our challenges and struggles, especially in this space. But I think the way that we support each other, the way that we amplify each other's voices, right? And even, learning how, yes, I am a woman of color, but I am not a Black woman of color, right? I can be white, I could take off my earrings, and I could be white passing if I needed to. And I could code switch very easily and get away with it. And not experiencing somebody with, braids, right? Or something, darker skin tone might not, as soon as they stepped in a room, they're getting judged. And so that is real, that I've had to learn how to show up better for others who may have some commonalities with me, but I don't have their same experience. And so likewise, I feel like I would love to expand the conversation, and hence why we're, talking today about how does that go the other way, right? Yeah. How can, folks show up better for the Native American community, especially because the numbers when you're talking about 17%, 18% on your side, growth, right? 24%, you're like, yeah, we're getting representation. And I'm like, over here at 0.1%. Like, it's like, I mean, it's not, we're laughing, but you're laughing
it's real.
Right? It's so
very
real.
real.
I think like that's what we have to think about. Like, you mean onesies, twosies. When you look around, you're the only, and not just the only of like one identity. It's the only of multiple identities in this space. And I think that's extremely, extremely hard to like to swallow and then not know where to go to. You know, yes, I could, you know, what ENG do I join? Like, I can join these and I can identify with the things, but like really to truly identify with and to understand the complexities, you know, because of who I am, like, I think it can get really lonely at times.
Yeah. And I think that's why this is important, right? Because I when we first started speaking about this, I thought it was important for us to have the conversation around bringing Native American challenges and issues up in DEI, because to your point, it gets lost, and it shouldn't get lost. And if you're continuously seeing kind of onesie twosies, it's because you're not being intentional in trying to make change happen, right? If you have one and you say you want to increase that by 50% or 100%, that's only adding another one person, right? But that can help, right? And it's those things about really being intentional, really trying to not just get representation, but ensuring that people have the support that they need to stay, that they feel valued, seen, heard, connected while they're there, that they have opportunities to outreach to others, right? So it's building an entire ecosystem of support where you don't even have to really recruit, because people will see like, oh yeah, okay, this has some really great programs or initiatives specifically for Native Americans, right? Like, that's what you want. And I don't think organizations have kind of gotten to that point yet, because to what you said earlier, there's this invisibility.
I think that we need to stop focusing on just the numbers. Yes, the number matter, but like, yes, data and metrics matter, right? But also like the input has to be like amplified, like increase significantly. So like, what are you doing to pour into that community so that the 6th grader and the 7th grader can see either themselves or somebody else or know about this opportunity? What are you doing to make sure there's, you know, accessibility through tech? Right. I mentor a number of Native students, and I remember going in there being like, yes, like I'm just going to help them. And I remember very distinctly, 3 of my students that I mentor, they like were 1st generation college students. They had no clue how to even like keep a calendar. They had no clue how to work life, school life balance, right? When do I get to, like, one of them was a gamer. When do I get to game? And when do I get, like, they had and they could not go back to their relatives. Because they didn't know. And then, you know, COVID hit, which created even larger disparity gaps, right? They're going back to the res, and their, you know, their siblings, they're sharing a room with multiple, you know, this is not everybody, but this was 3 of my students sharing a room. Their internet was so spotty. They were having to drive hours away to get reliable internet to be able to keep their schooling. One ended up having to drop out and go. One doesn't even know how to, like, I was like, there's resume services at your school. They're like, really? They have nobody to ask. And so I'm so thankful that I'm able to bridge the gap with like handfuls, right? But there is so much of this, like, sometimes I feel like it's got big auntie vibes. That's what I call myself. I don't call myself a mentor anymore. I just call it big auntie vibes. Like, I need to bring some big auntie vibes and be more of like a sister and aunt to these know, students, because we see, right, the numbers are increasing, the data increasing, that, like, you know, in the Black and brown communities, like a lot of, yes, they're not 1st generation college students anymore, right? But they might be 1st generation in tech. But on the Native American side, the data is showing that there are still so many 1st generation college students. And then to be able, you know, yes, you know, remote work life is amazing, right? But what does that actually look like? How are we creating, you know, inequities in spaces where they cannot work remotely because they don't have access to reliable internet when they go back home, or when they go visit their tribal communities or where they're living now. One of my mentees has to live with a friend so they can work remotely. And how are we equipping them and providing them with financial resources to be able to do that, and to not be the first generation college student or in tech, right? Or because I remember they landed their full-time job, and I was bawling like a baby. I was so proud. I knew they could do it, but like for them to like realize they could do it, and then for them to realize the impact. I mean, I'll get emotional talking about it, but they were like, "This will change my tribal community." Like this, they cared about their self, but they were carrying something so much bigger than we can ever imagine. They now everybody could look to them and say, you can do this. And yes, there are challenges and barriers, but we get to break those glass ceilings, right? And so I think that's what was really exciting is that she did this and was carrying a whole tribal community behind her. And so I think like when we look at the support, it's got to stop being with ROIs. Like it can't, like it's actually said, like, expand. That's two. That if you got one or two, that maybe you're getting six. I mean, maybe, your larger companies, you're getting more, but still, if you look at your overall, like I guarantee I've never seen a tech company, any company that has such a large amount of Native Americans. They're like, look at us, right? Nope. Yeah. If there is one, please tell me. And I'd love to know how you did it. But ultimately it's like, this is a long-term game, right? Yeah. We are making investments. Yes, we're going to hear about this now, but we are going to make long-term investments and pour in these communities in a bunch of different avenues so that we're not having this conversation, Sacha, in like 10, 20, 15, 15 years and be like, hey, we grew 0.1% again. Like it's got to change. And I think where it's going to take, yes, resources, that's financial, that's people, right? That's programs, it's initiatives, and they're not in it to like toot their own horn and say we hired 3 Native Americans or 1 or whatever that is. Yeah. It's literally to say that we're going to right some wrong here and that we're going to make an impact to these communities who we need their representation, in our organization.
It's building that pipeline, right? Like you said, this isn't just about that hire tomorrow. It's the 6th grader. It's the 6-year-old.
Yeah.
And making sure that there's a pipeline into these types of roles and opportunities. So I want to do a little bit of a pivot because you talked about, the big auntie vibes. And so how does auntie take care of self? What do you do to fill your cup and take care of you? Because, you shared, you're out there doing a lot of this. And so what do you do to kind of take care of Sunny?
Yeah. So I think, really it's important to me to like, when I'm off the clock, I'm off the clock, right? Like I used to try to do everything for everybody and I reached burnout really, really fast. I had a really rough 6 months of my life, and thank goodness for therapy and wine. But, I think that I really had to learn. I do no meeting Fridays. I take meetings on few exceptions, but I have challenging conversations often during the week, which leads me to sometimes I need more productive days. And so I do no meeting Fridays. I've implemented now that almost like 8 months now, and it's been a game changer for me. When I'm on FTO, I'm on FTO. Like maybe every now and then I reach out, but I really, even my VP messaged me and I was like, no, I'm not going to respond. I have to have firm boundaries because this work takes so much, right? When I am on, and I want to show up well. And I think something pivotal for me is when I was going to my counselor and I'm sobbing and I'm a hot mess and I show up in full transparent, like, help me. And they're like, what if I showed up for you and I didn't take any time off? What if I showed up for you and I was carrying everything that I would carry into this conversation and I could not show up well? Like, do you think I would show up well? And this is where I was really shifting from this engineering into this practitioner role. And she said, you cannot continue to do what you did in engineering. And while that's not healthy in that space, you're entering a whole nother level of mental capacity, emotional capacity, right? Having to suppress some of your emotions, right? And how you identify and what keeps you up at night to be able to have, intelligent conversations that are going to influence and coach. And she's like, and in my line of work, I cannot show up for you well if I don't, take those breaks. And so I really think like that's helpful. I think the last thing I do is I really find that giving back fills my cup up. So this Saturday, I'm going to spend my whole Saturday and I'm going to volunteer at a Native STEM day. And it's not even for my tribal community, it's for my sisters. And, I want to support her. She has been making waves in her community. And I'm going to drive and I'm going to get up super early and I'm going to put a smile on and I'm going to pour into those kiddos and teach them about STEM. And I think that's really how, giving back and seeing the change that, I want to be is really how it makes a difference for me.
Wonderful. Sunny, thank you so much for being here. I think you shared just words that people need to hear, because this isn't a conversation that we have all the time, right? We don't focus the conversation on our Native American and Indigenous populations. And I think that we're missing out on so much when we don't. So I appreciate you truly being here. Thank you. Thank you. And how can people get in touch with you if they want to continue the conversation with you?
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much for having me. It has been a pleasure and an honor to be in this space with you and be in your presence. I just find me on LinkedIn. So it's Sunny-Myers, Myers. I love to chat. I really make time available for these things. That's where I fill my Fridays up sometimes and like the little one-off chat. So
love it. Love it. So thank you so much, Sunny. And thank you everyone for being with us today. I hope that you were able to take a few nuggets away from this conversation that you can take into your organizations. And please continue to subscribe to our YouTube channel or follow us on your favorite podcast platform. Until next time, have a good one.